The stream.
Are we streaming?
Oh, we should be. Let me go check.
I'm waiting for the camera to show up on Alan's computer.
Link.
Streaming. Waiting to stream, so I keep refreshing, streaming.
You can do the stream.
Streaming.
Still having trouble computering.
Remember the key shortcut. Streaming.
I do have to say, what's terrifying is it was toast. It's now croutons. You guys are shrinking the mass required. Like, it's very efficient. I'll applaud you there.
Yeah. What you should be terrified of is when I offer you a cookie.
Yeah. You'd be like, oh, I see you're eating a salad.
That's funny.
There you are.
Well, you know what? We are live streaming. We're just doing it elsewhere. And so
Where is elsewhere?
Elsewhere is like not for the event that I scheduled. So I'm just gonna post a new link.
Okay.
Who has time for
Can we
this?
confirm that?
Yes.
Yeah. Give us the link and we'll confirm it's streaming.
Yeah.
Yeah, here it
And
is.
then we'll repost it.
Here's the deal right there. So it's live.
All right.
Excellent. That's what it looks like.
Good deal.
And
Do we get to see whether anybody's watching?
Yes. Okay.
Sorry.
There you go, NWA devs. And there's one watching now, and I'm pretty sure it's me. So
Yeah.
we'll leave that there. We'll leave that there. They'll come.
Here I go.
If you stream it, they will come.
I am 2 now on the stream.
Excellent. So there's a slight delay. All right, got me.
Are you listening to it as well?
No.
I was about to say,
I
that
just
would
know
drive
it's
me
not there
crazy.
yet.
There we are.
And there it is.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Bam.
So that's working. Okay. Well, let me. We're not recording yet, but let me get a level off everybody.
Hey, Macarena.
Wait, I wasn't actually watching the board at all. Good Macarena though. Give me another Macarena, Alan.
It felt good over here. Hey, Macarena.
That's good.
So my kids are really funny because they can't say Macarena in such a way that the echo in our house understands what they're asking for.
Oh, the Amazon
when they want to
echo.
listen to it. Yeah,
Oh,
the Amazon
I
echo.
was confused for a minute.
So yeah, they try and play that on demand. It never works out well.
That's
So
funny.
they make me say it for them.
Can I get an example of how one of your kids says
I wish I
Macarena?
could. I do. It's not memorable. It's just bad. It's like I don't remember how poorly you botched that, but it was
that's
bad.
funny. Sloan, let me get just a standard level out of you.
All right. I'm not going to try the Macarena.
I'm going to need more than that. I'm going to need more Sloan than that.
So I got to be louder?
Yeah, a little
Or
bit.
closer.
Okay, there you go.
There,
Closer.
that's
You hear it?
Closer's
Your ears
better.
there?
Closer, not loud.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Got it.
Wait, give me some more though.
Got to stay pretty close here.
Okay, I'm
If I
gonna give.
back up, just,
Yeah.
I'll lose it.
Yeah, it's right in
Just a
there.
minute, yeah.
There's a sweet
Okay.
spot. Cool.
Yeah.
I think we're ready.
Yep.
All right.
Man, it's fun to live stream it. Isn't this the coolest thing?
This is
Wow.
pretty cool.
I'm gonna leave this up. This is live
The
for
internet
us.
works.
Yeah, the internet's seeing a delayed version of it, but yeah, we got this for. We got it for a client meeting. That's not entirely true. I was looking up a live streaming camera solution for the podcast, and I found this, and I was like, oh, that'd be pretty good. That'd be pretty good for like a client meeting. So
So I
business expense.
Multi-purpose. It's
Yeah.
good.
To learn all about the new toys here, too.
Yeah, there's all kinds of. You haven't
there's
seen
all
any
kind of tech on the
equipment here.
table.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have invested more in hardware for the podcast than we have for the business over the past however long it's been, almost 3 months now. But yeah, so this is cool. It's just going to be tempting to look up here at this the whole time.
I know.
Don't do it.
Too,
Yeah.
And then we're like chickens, just like looking
Right.
up here, like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's a hawk.
Some of my favorite stories are friends who've worked in chicken houses and tell stories about like how dumb chickens are. Oh gosh, they are remarkably dumb.
yeah.
So are cows. but
Only
yeah.
only in Arkansas can you record a developer podcast and then have someone talk about chicken houses, Northwest Arkansas specifically, and everyone around the table kind of nod,
Like knowingly,
Like,
yeah.
oh yeah. In the
I've heard those
in
too.
the same way that you might be like, oh man, I've got a friend that's got a story about Jenkins. You know, we're like, oh yeah, that too, Jenkins and chicken houses. But on that note, Jenkins, we're
Oh,
I haven't
nice.
heard any Jenkins stories yet, actually.
the only Jenkins story that I've got is I used it for 3 months and wanted to die the whole time.
yeah.
It's terrible.
I haven't actually tried to do anything with it. I've just learned that it's kind of the baseline of the,
It's kind of
CI
in
world.
Yeah, and it was first to market.
It's like 30 years old.
yeah, it's an enterprise
Been around a
standard.
while,
Been
yeah.
around for a long
And
time.
the UI still looks like Windows 95.
Here, I'll be everyone's guide. Spoiler alert: we're talking CI and DevOps.
Oh,
today.
thank you.
Jenkins is the tool for that.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tyrell.
Yeah. I was like, oh, we just got deep real fast. We went like
someone's
Just
chickens
kind of
and then
assume that
Jenkins.
the viewers know what Jenkins is, right?
Yeah, I mean, we should. I don't know. We haven't actually surveyed the audience. It might just be a bunch of confused people being like, "This isn't NPR." But people,
Terry Gross's voice has changed.
we've got. I'm reticent to call you a guest, Sloan, though it's your first time on the
More
podcast.
like I'm really, really tardy.
We're glad you could join us on the show, though. Finally, we're in episode 8. You're only 18 episodes
Right.
late for coming in.
I had to make it before it got up to 3 orders of magnitude.
Sloan's,
I guess this would be fashionably late officially on a podcast.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think so.
Late, anyway.
Well, Sloan's a member of our core dev team here at Lofty, and we thought CI and kind of broadly like DevOps and Kubernetes would be a good topic because I know that is the hell that you have lived in for a while.
As I'm staring at a red
I was
CI
gonna say,
test
what's
that's a
the-
broken Kubernetes.
You
integration
understand-
That's
test.
a Friday afternoon.
And I don't know
deploy.
You
why
understand-
Got
yeah.
there.
the name of the show is purely in jest. You're not actually supposed to be deploying on a Friday during the show, although that's happened. many
It
times.
happens.
It's
yeah.
happened like way more than we
I
expected.
can.
Yeah.
I see a red circle CI screen,
yeah.
and I feel for him over there. But
Yeah, it's it finds interesting ways to break. They're hard to predict.
Yeah.
So-
Learning a lot about entropy.
Very brittle.
you're running. So what? I mean, to give some context, without getting into specifics of the project, but what you're working on is moving from a somewhat sophisticated cloud environment, but not one that's containerized, right? Or at least not in its cloud environment. We have containerized versions of it on-prem. And getting it from VM-based and just skipping right through to Kubernetes. And it's a relatively sophisticated environment as well. It's deployed. It's multi-regional. It's in U.S. It's also in Europe. It's in Frankfurt data centers because of crazy German data laws. It's an internationalized app. And so like, not only are we making the move there to Kubernetes, but like in a particularly sophisticated environment that already had dozens and dozens of hosts and multiple stacks in
Running
production.
Celery, Redis,
Yeah, it's
Rabbit.
a large scale app. It's a data science application. So I feel like trial by fire, right?
Yeah.
To learn Kubernetes on that stack.
Well, and all this stuff is relatively new to me as well, and so I'm learning about the process and the principles and the tools, and also finding all the cracks and how all those things work together all at the same time. It's been a kind of a long, ongoing process. The project had a continuous integration pipeline of sorts before, but it was pretty minimal. Basically, just ran unit tests for the application, and so I've tried to turn this into a proper CI pipeline, while also containerizing the application and moving into container orchestration in Kubernetes, and so all those pieces are new, and I'm getting to explore all the ways that things can go wrong along the
And
way.
they're all going to get deployed at the same time.
Yeah. And so it's gone on longer than I'd like, but it also means I'm finding all these problems before they're production problems. And so, it's a little bit of a luxury, I guess, to be able to do it that way, but
I think that's also a constraint on that particular project. Is it's not a huge team, but this is not like a 2 dev team, right? There's how many developers are on that project now these days? It's growing, so obviously that's part of it.
I want to say we're at like 10,
all together,
12 maybe.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds about right.
Yeah,
and that's with some QA folks and some interns and everything.
and that number was 2. Well,
Right.
that number was 2 just over a year ago, and the 2 people were Sloan and I.
Yeah.
And so
And it wasn't you full time.
Yeah,
And-
it was-
Well,
it was
there's
me.
also Greg. You got to count Greg. He's,
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, we can't pull it from the live stream, but we can pull it out of there.
Yeah, sorry.
Just only say nice things about him from now on.
Well, we love Greg.
We do.
Yeah, but the CTO of the project was also developing on it. But he same constraint with him as me in his marginal time, right? So really, it was you full time.
Yeah.
And that was just over a year ago, and so now we get 4 14, 15 months down the road, and there's 12, right? So this is a growing team, and so there's a lot of people learning the tooling. Also, we're learning the kind of breakpoints in the process.
To
and
some extent, we're
workflows.
teaching them about continuous integration as well, and you know, developer discipline involved in that, and all of that sort of thing. Like, you can't merge code if your tests don't all pass, and that's not just unit tests, it's not just JavaScript tests, it's also integration tests,
Right?
It's the whole thing, right? If you see red, and so of course, if they're seeing red, and that's a job that's broken that has nothing to do with the code, that's broken for some DevOps reason, then, you know, that doesn't work very well. And so trying to get the process to the point where I can basically require all the other developers to trust it is, you know, turning out to be harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of ways things can go wrong even when everything's working.
I mean, this is
I was going to
No,
say.
yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting the balance in like you want to require people to have passing tests, but when like you're building it out, there's going to be a learning curve, but you have to keep it from becoming like the boy who cried wolf, so that people still respond when they see their test fail instead of going, "Oh, I'm a test fail," but that doesn't matter.
Right.
And so like being able to instill in people, your tests can't fail, but also like, but right now it's kind of okay, and just it's a learning curve for sure.
Well, your test can't fail when you merge, right? You've got to have all your tests passing by then. And so one thing I've struggled with a little bit is, so I have a CI pipeline that does a lot of different things, some of them concurrently, but the centerpiece is building the Docker image, you know, that's used for the application. And then there's various tests that happen on that, and then you deploy it to Kubernetes and you run tests against that. But getting that image built and testing it locally takes like 28 minutes, all right? So you're building this Docker image with all the dependencies and everything, then you run the unit tests against it, and then you run some integration tests against it in a Docker Compose environment, and that's sort of a minimal amount of testing that you need to be able to trust that the image works. And so the image then gets pushed at the end of that, you know, 27-minute process. And I go back and forth. It's been that way for a long time, but I may end up breaking it up and put the image build in its own task, and then push the image without testing it, but then run the testing after that. There's a couple of reasons for that, and one is that
concurrency, at least with the Kubernetes testing, right? You can.
Well, you got to build the image before you can do anything else, but we could do all those.
But I mean, you could
tests
run
right.
Kubernetes tests and Docker's tests in tandem because the image would already be built.
And unit tests too, because those take a long time.
Right.
And so all that could be done concurrently. You know, that's one thing. Another advantage is that as you're building something out, especially if it's like a front end change, maybe that breaks a QA test or something, but you don't really care about that QA test at that point. Or sometimes even a unit test that's broken, but you need to go test something. You need to actually deploy it somewhere that you can test it, even though you have failing tests, right? So that's a place where you might actually want to go ahead and build and push the image, even if you don't have working tests. That hasn't been a problem for us yet because we haven't migrated into exclusively, you know, Docker Kubernetes land.
Right.
People can still deploy their branches with the old conventional AWS method,
Which is how it's been set up for a long time.
How it's been set
That's
up.
kind of part of the you know, like working towards the marginal deployment. But okay, let's stop and take a step back. I think we went deep, which is good. But kind of stepping further back and maybe even abstracting, like, if you can, the project you're on away from it.
Sure.
Like the fundamental shift from moving from like a VM based, what we would have a year ago said it was a standard environment, a standard deployment for us would have been EC2 boxes in AWS,
Terraform building those,
Terraform scripts to control the infrastructure,
Ansible provisioning those.
Ansible configuration management and bringing them into configuration parity and deploying everything was Ansible scripts.
Yeah,
and then
Circle CI running the whole show.
Circle pulling the strings and directing the puppets and stuff like that. And that was a normal environment. We still have a couple projects like that, but like Kubernetes, totally different thing.
Changes the whole workflow. I mean, so when I inherited the DevOps part of this project, we were deploying via Ansible scripts to EC2 machines. And so basically you go allocate the EC2 instances that you want to use as your production environment before you do anything with them, right?
Right.
And you allocate those with Terraform code, right, is the way this was set up. And then you run Ansible scripts against those existing servers, and you run those scripts every time the code changes. So you have these same server instances. You know, you're maintaining them as pets instead of cattle.
Love
you're
it.
Not,
I'm glad
I
that
knew it
got
was
said.
good. I knew it would come out.
That's what we wanted.
That's the key takeaway
Right.
of
You
like
don't want
modern
pets.
DevOps, right?
You don't want
Yeah.
pets. You
Yeah.
want cattle.
Cattle, not
Because
pets.
you accumulate, you know, volatile changes on those machines that are not really deterministic, especially if somebody goes in there and SSHs in and cowboys up and
So
changes some
I don't
things around.
I don't
right?
know
You
if you've listened to the show much. I know you weren't here for some of the conversations, but there have been several points where we talk. We get nostalgic. We get halfway through our first beer and start reminiscing a lot on the show.
The good old days.
Exactly, and a lot of times the good old days have come up, and we've talked about how in the good old days, you had personal attachment to hardware.
Yeah,
Much like cattle
This
that
is
should
my favorite
exactly.
server, right?
Much like cattle that turns into a pet, you give it a name, and they have quirks, and you know them. You're like, oh, that particular server's always been that way because that guy that used to work here 3 years ago used to get in there and change stuff, and that's just that. We have Bart and Lisa, and Bart's just a little bit quirky,
can't always trust Bart. Some days
Exactly.
he doesn't.
Did you really work somewhere where they were named after Simpsons characters? Because that seems like something that would
Totally.
happen.
We had a couple of different. We would group them. We kind of cluster them, if you will, but like based on their whatever utilization they had. We had Bart and Lisa. The web stack was all Django stuff, and they were super into the jazz aspect of. So Django's named after Django Reinhardt. So our servers were Duke and Ella were the web nodes. Miles was our load balancer that we put in front of it.
Nice.
Miles Davis. And
You had a Dizzy in there somewhere, I hope.
I don't know if it got that far. We had a database, and for whatever reason, the database was like inherited from another stack. They didn't want to rename it, and so the database never got a jazz name. It was just called Yoda. So we had some Star Wars theme. So we had Yoda in there, which made no sense in the rest of the
So out of
jazz.
place.
Yeah.
But that's a good example of pets. You guys have pets,
Right,
so you
right.
had
Exactly,
to import Yoda.
Yeah, well, we
You
couldn't
know.
just abandon Yoda, and we weren't
Right.
going to change its name. It's not like we picked it up at the shelter and
'cause
said, like,
he's still
your
quirky,
name's
he's
not
still
Rose, your
Yoda,
name's
yeah.
Yoda,
Yeah.
But so Yoda was Yoda, and when Yoda was adopted by that stack, he kept his name, and then we kind of diverged because we had a test environment named Vader. We were like, oh, let's keep going. So it was this weird.
How fitting is that?
Yeah, and so now that stack was like Luke Skywalker playing gypsy jazz guitar at the cantina in Mos Eisley.
And
but
I imagine running tests in the bog, like in there where he finds, he sees himself.
Yeah, sees himself in the
the
cave.
Vader mask,
yeah.
yeah.
But so they had personalities and stuff. What else we had other one. Bart and Lisa was definitely a group of them and some others. But that stuff was fun. But those days are long gone. If you have servers that have names, you can pretty much call that a liability.
The exception is RDS instances, right? Because you kind of have to keep those, right?
Because there's the persistence of data, and also for some fucking reason, it takes an hour to provision one.
It sure
and
does.
who has time for that shit?
Yeah, because otherwise you could snapshot it.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
have
we
another
also
one, but-
never ever change the hardware specs. We might change the database schema, but Django does that, and so we never actually have to touch those RDS instances. Once we've allocated them, they just live there, right? I mean,
I feel a need to take a pause here and say, for those of you who build JavaScript applications,
This would be the MongoDB.
yeah,
is
and
RDS.
A server is.
yeah, and these relational databases tend to have important information in them that you can't lose,
Right.
and so that's kind of the context there.
a little bit more bulletproof than
They,
the
Carry on.
documents.
By the way, Blake couldn't make it today.
I was waiting for a Blake reference.
Sorry,
Where's
Blake.
our combs?
Sorry, Blake. He'll be back in 2 weeks. He told me 2
All
weeks.
right.
Good deal.
I'm sorry I missed Blake.
What is interesting though is I was just thinking because like I pull up an RDS, like I'm in like the EC2 panel, and everything's got like real technical names. Nothing has these like colloquial names or fun names. You know, I worked at a place where one was like the planets of the solar system.
Right.
One was like the characters of Lord of the Rings.
Nice.
And I don't pull up any EC2 panel and be like
Right.
Legolas.
Yeah.
Gimli,
Yeah.
you know, and you
They're not characters from Lost.
Exactly.
I had characters from Lost in a Linode account.
But the name.
Nice.
Did you really?
Yeah, I regretted it around season 5.
As you should have. But everything is far more like pertinent information now because we expect them to be ephemeral. We expect to knock them down, and so we don't have that same kind of like affection for them in a weird way because they're servers, obviously.
Yeah, because now you pull up AWS and they all have names, and it's 16 characters of hexadecimal. And,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you can change those though.
Yeah,
like
you can tag 'em.
You can take
Well,
the
or-
time and tag them differently, but no one does.
Well,
in the
and
way
so
that
they
they would have
have
before.
some
Because
of them
they
have
live-
descriptive names and so on, but
but
they're not.
in a lot of cases they end up living. I mean, like in your test environment in this project, not the production environment, but in your test environment. I mean, these things are up and gone 40 minutes later when the tests are done.
Right. And when we're building stuff with things like Terraform or other scripts, we're not building our scripts to be like, let's call this one Julian.
Yeah.
Like it's just not how we operate.
If you were naming it after Lord of the Rings character, and believe me, there's plenty, but you'd be deep into second rank Uruk-hai by now.
Yeah.
You'd have to read the Silmarillion just to name your
The
server.
appendices.
I tried that once. It did not end well.
I
read
it's
the
a slow
Silmarillion.
read.
You got all
I
the way
read
through
it.
the
I was in
Silmarillion?
like 7th grade. Yeah, I read it all the way through.
See, I
read
tried
it in
to-
I did a
seventh
book
grade.
report
7th
on
grade
it.
is impressive.
Yep.
See, I tried it in like 9th grade, and then I realized I'm just reading a history textbook.
Yeah.
That's not fun.
I
And
have
if I'm
no
going to do
idea
that,
why.
it might as well be a real history.
Yeah.
I have no idea why it captivated me. Maybe because it wasn't a real history. But
Yeah.
I
I could see
totally
it
relate.
around that
It's somewhere
time,
between
that
a real
being
history and like
fascinating,
and a religious text of a certain sort.
Yeah.
You know, from what I only made it. I've read like maybe
Yeah, it
20% of it. Or
A lot of it
something.
reads like Kings, right? Where it's
Yeah.
just listing
Yeah, well
all
said.
the
Yeah,
Yeah,
such
right.
and such
Genealogies
begat
and
such and
such,
such,
yeah.
right? Yeah. That's I'm compelled now to build an API service that you can hit in Terraform that names your machines after like second rank Uruk-hai, because I know that someone's
It
done
should.
the list, and that'd be
You'd
fun.
have to do like Heroku though, and have a couple different sets of randomized portions of
be
your
like
name.
3 portions. Yeah,
You'd have to
or you could like be descriptive. It could be like
Yeah.
angry.
angry Uruk-hai sergeant.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoever or whatever. I don't know.
So cats not or cats. Pets not cattle.
Cat's not cattle.
Some people think cats are pets. I disagree, but
Cats are more like they share the same space as you. They don't consider themselves your pets.
No,
totally.
no, they're roommates.
Yeah.
Cats are more like containers than virtual environments. Cattle not pets, right? And
Kubernetes,
that's
herding cats.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's an accurate description to a certain extent. So okay, you have a very this is a personal observation. You have a very unique way of being able to capture and describe things, especially when talking to engineers. I would like to hear, because good luck explaining to a lot of engineers, me included, and a lot of us from not long ago, on what Kubernetes, just what exactly it is and what it does. If you haven't worked with it, even if you like work with Docker, it may not be abundantly clear exactly what it does and all the things it does. So how would you succinctly describe Kubernetes to our listeners who are lost and confused people looking for all things considered?
Container
I think-
orchestration.
Right. So go look up container orchestration. But while you're doing that, the way I'll explain that is, I can explain to you what Kubernetes is like I can explain to you what an electron is. The thing is, nobody knows what it is.
This
we
is
know
what I
what it
reference.
does. We don't know. It's a name for something that we can't explain. I can't tell you what Kubernetes is. I can tell you what it does and how it helps solve problems. That
we can observe
have.
it, but much like
we can't
much like
define
the Copenhagen what is it, the Copenhagen interpretation by observing it you change its behavior. But
That's right.
And in the spirit of like of what it does, you know, like I like what's a really good application for it, right? Like, do I need Kubernetes for my blog?
Right.
you certainly could.
I mean, for my
You
I
could.
could put
Highly
WordPress on my
distributed blog,
Kubernetes.
yeah.
Yeah.
But a better concept might be Kubernetes would be an exceptional way to run a shared hosting platform on 3 computers instead of a dedicated machine to every host, right, or to every client.
So let's back up a little bit and talk about the evolution that got us here on that project, right? I mean, we start with servers that we allocate with Terraform code.
Well, we start with a Mac Mini on someone's desk.
Yeah, right.
Truthfully, but then after that,
so once you get this thing, you build an app, right? You need to deploy it to the cloud. You need people to use it. And when we started this project, the sort of, maybe not bleeding edge, but essentially cutting edge way of doing that was to deploy the application to a server that you allocated in the cloud, right? You go to Amazon EC2, you allocate an instance, and then you deploy code to it. Then you hook up all the networking and it works. You do that by hand the first time, and then, if you want to actually do DevOps, then you encode all of that into code that you can check into a repository, Terraform code that builds what you need, right? But the way we were doing that was just starting with kind of a base Ubuntu image and then deploying that server and then using another script to deploy our code to provision that server, to set it up the way it needed to be, and to get all of our code there and to turn everything on.
Yeah.
But that's done after the machine was allocated.
the machine
right?
came up with an image, an AMI,
Right.
an Amazon machine image, which was an Ubuntu server that had
Empty.
shit on it. It was,
Right.
I mean, it wasn't totally empty. It was
an image, yeah.
configured in as much as like it was a machine that booted and did something,
Right.
but nothing
Well,
specific to our
It's
application.
a basic Ubuntu deployment, right?
Yeah.
You have a server that's running an OS.
Back
and
in
then-
the good old days, when
Yeah,
you
right.
when you went down to the server room to go see what the hell Bart was up to, and you slid a disk into it and said, "All right,
Pretty much.
Ubuntu 804, here
And
we
that's
go."
what's cool.
Starting from scratch.
Amazon AMIs made that even way cooler. Of
Right.
like,
Yeah.
well, at least
So we're
it's,
doing the
you
same
know.
thing, but at a more abstracted level, right?
Right,
But we're setting up a machine, and then we're putting our code on it. And when our code changes, we just go put our code on it again, right?
Right.
And so if someone's come in and they've changed some configuration files on that machine, well, those are going to be there. They're not going to get replaced by the next deploy, right? So the next step in the evolution was
I think we were using Fabric then. That's how that
yeah,
was.
that's right.
Fabric
Deploying
was
with
like
Fabric.
just
That's kind of the
checking it.
precursor to
Well,
Ansible.
Yeah,
right?
We
Fabric
started
is like
with
a great
Fabric,
way.
and then we went to Ansible, but
Yeah.
we're still redeploying to existing servers instead of allocating new servers each time.
Right.
So the next step in the evolution was, instead of first deploying the cluster and then allocating it by, then provisioning it by putting our code on it, instead of doing that, we build an image. It's not a Docker image. It's an AMI. It's an Amazon AMI. I'll let you people can go Google that, but you can build them with a tool called Packer. And so
Also
I took the same
made by HashiCorp, same company
Also
that does
made by
Ansible.
Same as Terraform.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
I took those same Ansible scripts, adapted them slightly, and used them to build an AMI image instead of provisioning an existing server.
And you
then
did this
used
by
Terraform.
you would actually build an EC2 box.
Packer
and-
does the Packer tool. It takes care of all.
So
that
it
for us,
actually
yeah.
stands. It does the same thing, right?
That's
It
right.
actually automates. It stands up one
But it
version.
takes a snapshot of that
and then
image.
snapshots that
once
as an
it's
image,
ready.
and then
That's
you can
right.
take that image and throw it in an autoscale group. So if the autoscale group autoscales, you don't like before autoscaling was like theoretically there.
Yeah, right.
But like when an autoscaled and empty machine came up, that was like, what do I
Without your
do now?
code,
Yeah,
yeah.
and you had to actually deploy to it. So this is an image comes up and it actually boots with the running application on it. at
And
this
so
point.
our DevOps process went from, allocating a server with Terraform and then provisioning it with Ansible. We switched that, and we used the Ansible to build and define an image, an AMI image that we then deploy with Terraform. So we kind of switch the order.
Yeah.
right? You build it and then deploy it
So you tell
instead of deploying it and then
Terraform,
building it.
go give me 3 T2 mediums and use this AMI, which has our app ready
Which
to
has
go.
already been allocated.
Right.
And so deployment became a more resilient process because you build a new image each time and then deploy it. It also took a lot longer because we're not deploying in place to hardware that's already there, right?
Yep.
But we
Sad day, by the way, Alan. I
Dude,
should have used I should have used your life hack of bringing the second one.
I mean,
in.
I'm pacing myself. I'm about to have to go get us
if you,
refills.
will you do a refill run?
Yeah, I will.
I don't know if
How's
you have enough
everyone doing?
hands. Yeah.
I went with a big fat glass of bourbon here.
That's
It's
a
Okay,
smart
you
plan.
look like you're doing all right.
Strategic.
I'm good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be back.
Oh, good man.
Yeah, to be continued.
Yeah.
You guys carry on.
Sorry, I cut you
That's
off.
all right.
This is
That's
important stuff.
yeah. So the
Yeah, let's do it.
reach.
That needed a
You,
picture.
you should have got a picture.
Reenact. No.
The live feed people get to see this. This probably gets edited out of the actual episode. Have you guys seen the episode of Letterkenny? Yeah. This is the bonus. This is what the $1 Patreon donation is for.
Yeah, it's like when you
All right, wait, you're good whenever. You're good whenever. Okay. Just take the glasses off.
Like, no, I'm good. You just take the picture.
No, seriously, I've taken the picture a bunch. That's what I was trying to say.
All right.
That was some quality artwork.
Now, Sloan, you didn't lose your place there, did you?
No, rolling deploys.
Okay, got it.
So we went from what do you call a not rolling deploy? Static
well, it
deploy?
depends. There's blue-green deploy.
yeah,
you
I
build
was
a
gonna
whole
say
environment
blue,
and switch it, right?
But like down,
yeah, we're not-
down the scale from that.
Yeah,
What did we
you're
have
not even
before?
switching. It's just like I'm gonna roll out and everything's gonna die for like a
place,
minute.
in-place deployment,
In-place deploy,
a
yeah.
really
Yeah.
terrible deployment.
So we went
or,
from in-place
yeah.
deployment to rolling deployment. So
well,
at
yeah.
the very least, we're building a new server before we actually deploy it.
Yeah.
Right.
Which in practice didn't end up gaining us that much because I had to put all those steps in a script so everyone else could use it, and they just use the whole thing all at once. And so
Right.
we don't actually end up getting the benefit from those rolling deploys that we should have. But along the way, there's still all of these problems that you run into, right? It can be difficult to roll back. We really didn't have adequate testing in place. We did have a CI pipeline, but it didn't do enough. And so all of the problems that you end up with, even with rolling deploys, so that was the next step in our evolution. But where we're going now is taking that even further into containerization, an approximation of microservices. We still have a pretty big web, app,
Right.
and so on. But the idea is that it functions, that all of the other services, instead of being deployed to their own clusters, will be available in the Kubernetes cluster in the same way. Right?
So specifically of that of the problems there, and like not having test coverage, consistent problem,
Separate problem.
right?
really,
It like could have been fixed without Kubernetes, but like what kind of problems in that particular environment? Because I think it's important. You pointed out not quite there on microservices. Definitely moving that direction. There are multiple moving pieces. It's not just a web server slinging code.
Yeah.
I mean, we have asynchronous tasks. We've got queuing systems. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of pieces moving, and in a normal functioning environment of that application, even without scale, to serve one user, there were 5 or 6 machines in a stack to do that, right?
Right.
So that has been consolidated in Kubernetes, but we're not getting the benefits yet of like we have a authentication service that we can scale independently from everything else. So what problems did it solve? Or is it poised to solve, I should say?
Poised to solve. So one is an arbitrary number of stacks. In the conventional deployment system, we have to have Terraform code for each and every stack that we deploy. And so you end up with either repeated code or just a lot of, generalized code that you have to manage for all of those stacks, right? And if you have, say, a couple of different production stacks in different regions or whatever, you have staging stacks, you have testing stacks, you don't always know how many testing stacks you're going to need.
Right.
With a conventional deployment system, the way, without Kubernetes at least, you're much more limited in the number of stacks you can have When I say stack, I mean a full application stack with all of its dependencies.
Right.
The web app, the workers, the supporting services.
Load
and so on.
balancers, databases.
Right. Everything that's needed to run the application, to run an instance of the application.
S3 buckets, hamsters
so-
and wheels.
Yeah, right. So Kubernetes makes it really easy to have not even fungible stacks necessarily, though that's another thing you can do. Of course, you can have as many instances of a particular version of the app as you want. You can have different versions of the app running at the same time.
All sharing hardware, right?
Right.
And that's a big point there.
Yeah. Because
If that's
you
not-
could do all that with AMIs theoretically,
Right,
sure.
but this is very efficient.
The thing here is like one T2 medium could in theory have, if you don't have really memory constraints,
Yeah.
they could share the CPU and one might bog the other. But like if there's no memory constraints, lots and lots of these containers running on pool of what may be small servers or whatever, but definitely packed in together in this way that's really transparent to you as the developer or user of like, where's my service even running? Somewhere in this cluster.
Yeah.
I mean, like Docker Swarm is actually a very approachable way to start looking at clustering. It is way easier to set up and test.
It's much easier to understand too than Kubernetes.
Yeah.
If you already know what Docker is and how to use it, like that's a whole other question.
So Alan, when we were building our eDiscovery app,
Yep.
before we knew that it had a lot of microservices. It had, I mean, you've worked with us on eDiscovery projects. It was just a further evolution of that. You know how many
So
outside dependencies there are.
we had PDF generation, right? We
Yeah.
had text parsing,
OCR.
and,
We had just a queuing and a data pipelines. We had workers that were just orchestrating like the processing of data.
yeah. So 3 or 4 microservices, on this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and plus web services,
Yeah.
plus worker queues, plus RabbitMQ, like all that stuff, right? So I think we actually ended up having like when we got it to Kubernetes, like a production version that had almost a dozen pods running of independent services running in there. But before we went to Kubernetes with it, we tried Docker Swarm.
We did.
And then we got it set up quickly. And I remember if you have trouble understanding what Kubernetes is and does, my suggestion is to go try Docker Swarm.
And there, I forget the name of the app. Maybe I can look that up.
There was like
there was
a
Node.js.
Yeah, it was just like
dashboard.
there was a dashboard that let you see what the hell it was doing. You could just basically visualize here's n number of rectangles, where n is the number of workers in your pool in your cluster, and then it would divide them up and show you what containers were there.
Oh, the nodes. Yeah.
Yeah, you could, in the nodes you could see what containers running and on which one, and like that it came up for the first time, and we're like, oh,
Yeah. Right.
I see. Like that for whatever reason.
Visualization.
The swarm
matters.
gods have decided that my 3 web services are on this one, but I didn't tell it where to go and just put it. And then we watched them, start moving around as we were hitting it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The nodes would get deployed here
it's
and there.
allocating resources, and then on that, we ended up on Kubernetes because we gave that a try and immediately could see how much better at it that was at Docker Swarm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
So
moving
Swarm,
stuff
we were
around.
like bolting on this node app to visualize it, which gave you, one maybe 2% of the power of the actual Kubernetes dashboard.
Yeah.
So like we saw what it was doing and it was cool, and then it started doing shit we didn't want it to do. And it was like, how do we configure it? And there wasn't an API.
Remember there was some service that kept swapping back and forth between machines.
This was admittedly over a year ago. Swarm's come along.
Right,
They have an
right,
enterprise
right,
version now. It may be great. I don't know. All I know is then based on my knowledge from over a year ago, or January of last year, is like Swarm is a great way to understand container orchestration. You should totally install that, set it up, try it, and then move to Kubernetes and don't use it in production.
Yeah.
That was my experience.
I think one of the things that made it really easy was like it uses Docker Compose. So like once you figure out Docker
use the same
Compose and all
syntax.
that,
Right.
You don't have to. The advantage to a developer is you don't have to go learn all the Kubernetes syntax.
It's
which
kind of
course
it's
is-
kind of annoying to build Kubernetes. What are they called? Not configuration
Specs.
files. Specs.
Specs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
You
there's
found a
lot
tool
to
that
it.
converts Docker Compose files to Kubernetes specs,
Yeah.
but like it
It's
gets
not
you
perfect though.
it's like
you still have to
80%.
tune stuff.
Exactly.
That's when
It did.
computers talk to computers.
It probably got me
It's
about
not gonna
80%.
be- yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
you
as soon
can't-
as code can write code, we're all done.
Yeah, it's like a Google Home and an Amazon Echo talking to each
Yeah,
other.
it's
not
Alexa,
gonna be good.
Alexa and Siri
Yeah,
trying to tell a
exactly.
knock knock joke back and
Right.
forth. They feel satisfied by the end of it, but
Or like when a WYSIWYG in
Right.
like some
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of CMS generates code, and you have to go try and modify that.
Yeah.
So terrible.
That's a great way to say it.
So terrible.
it's you use, what is that called that generates specs from Docker Compose? Is that built into Kubernetes?
No, that was Compose with a
K.
with a K.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
Nice.
put it.
With a K,
Let me
of
find
course.
that one.
It'll
too.
be in the show notes. But Compose,
Yeah.
the output of that is a Kubernetes spec that came from like Adobe Dreamweaver.
Wow.
Is that burned? Is that too?
That hurts.
No.
Does that go
so
too
bad.
hard?
That you're just hearing old synapses firing.
Yeah, that's right.
as well. Yeah,
That was the
Dreamweaver.
call of
Oh, man.
nostalgia that you just heard.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Everybody panicked.
I suddenly I felt a great disturbance in the force.
So yeah,
At least
code
that I didn't-
writing code tends to not write very good code. We find, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, well, Django's an exception. That like the templates and stuff that you get for certain things can sometimes be okay, but you know,
That's
code can't really
hardly
write code yet.
that's hardly code generation though. I mean that is that is literally like text file Mad Libs.
Yeah, it's
is-
like
is that-
configuration file
Yeah.
creation.
that was still written by a programmer at some point back
right.
there, right?
And it's just strings are getting plugged into holes. It's not nearly the same as that. Although there's all that crazy. What's the word for it? It's not compiling, but transpiling in JavaScript
or
land,
even
where
interpolation.
code threading code. Although we don't spend a lot of time looking at what the hell ends up in our Webpack bundle, we just assume that it did the right thing. I assume that's probably pretty gnarly code.
And then so there are lots of cases of that, right? But
it works. You just don't see the problem with using Compose with a K is what we've found, and we may be wrong. And please go to the website and tell us a better way.
Yeah, right.
That tool might have gotten better too.
Sure,
It's been a
but tell
while
us if
since
there's a
we've
better way. But in local environments, we haven't really been running Kubernetes locally. We've
Right.
been maintaining a Docker Compose stack
Yeah.
and having to keep that in parity with what we deploy to Kubernetes. The problem is that code writes code. What gets generated by Compose with a K has to be maintained independently of Docker Compose,
have
and so
to
there's no
think about-
editability. Like,
well, you have to think about a few different things with Kubernetes that you don't with Docker Compose.
sure,
right?
right.
I mean,
you have Docker Compose can safely assume that all your shit's on one node.
That's right.
Right.
This is all on one machine.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. There's no network in between me
you don't
and my
have to deal with
disk
any of
and-
that. Like you don't have to worry. I don't know. Can you put resource limits in Docker Compose? I
don't
guess
think
you probably
so,
can, but I've never tried.
Maybe with Docker
yeah.
Compose 3 or 4, whichever one we're on.
I mean, I think Docker Compose's resource limits are the resource limits of the machine, right?
Right.
or maybe the virtual machine, because so I think it works off of your Docker machine, like locally. So on Mac, that's the guy you go up top there and you can restart it or whatever.
It's the
And you
thing
can
that I
give it
kill every time I
resources.
start my computer, unless I'm working on
Yeah,
Docker
on the
Compose.
e-discovery side, remember I had to crank everything up to run it locally.
Oh yeah, that bad boy needed
yeah.
that bad boy
I had to
needed
give it
eight
all
cores.
I had to give it all my
Everyone
resources.
on the team was working on that for a couple months, and it was like great. You could walk out into the main work floor and you could hear all
the fans.
all of the fans.
Yeah, right.
It's hard if you're not if you work in Python a lot and you're not doing it's single threaded, it's not multi-process. It's hard to write Python code that gets the fans whirring on a MacBook Pro. But that app, man, it sounded like like the Johnson Space Center out there, or Kennedy. Which one did they actually launch rockets from? Is it Johnson or Kennedy? Kennedy,
I think.
It sounded like a rocket taking off, folks. That's
I was
what I'm trying to get
convinced
to.
this
You.
machine wouldn't survive, but
We
but
put-
it did. So.
There it is.
You know, people,
I keep waiting for mine to die, and it
Yours
keeps
is
not
like-
dying.
yours
So
is amazing.
As long as it keeps going, I'll keep using
What
it.
year is that thing?
2012.
Oh, wow.
2012
good.
was a good year.
I've got
Yeah.
a 2012
Vintage.
That was the best year
Yeah.
for MacBook Pros, apparently.
I've got a 2012 Pro Retina that is definitely feeling the age. Like
Yours is damn near bulletproof. Do you even have an S? Did you spec it up with an SSD when you bought it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
so you-
that- yeah,
that's
so
why.
that's
That's
the
the
key. Yep.
difference.
Yep.
That was
I
an
went,
option.
I went old school.
It's only
Did not-
half a
did
gig
not work.
though, so I'm always running out of space.
Oh fuck you!
Wait, half a
Yeah,
you need half a
SSDs
terabyte?
are
Half a terabyte.
I've got a quarter of
Or
it.
We've
half
got
a
250.
terabyte, I meant, yeah.
Yeah, we've got 250 gigs on these SSDs because the damn half. We're a real company and we're making real money. But when we were buying machines a while back, we were a little bit cheaper and we didn't spec up the hard drives. And Ben and I were talking about this today. The next time we do hardware refreshes, the only thing that we're going to do, I would opt for less processor power and more hard drive space
Yep.
in a
Absolutely.
heartbeat.
Oh, half a terabyte's not
Absolutely.
enough. I run out all the time.
Believe me, well, I mean, I believe you because today it's Friday. It's the end of the week, and I ran out of hard drive space again, as I've mentioned on this show.
Did you purge your Docker?
I
environment?
went and purged my Docker images again, as I do once a week, and I also had to delete our podcast from my computer as well as other
Yeah,
podcasts.
those WAV files, they're massive.
No shit, we record to MP3 now. Well, I compress it on the thing because I can't afford to have a gig per episode.
Fair enough.
Yeah. That's a gig per episode. That's a day of my week. So hard drive space is a big thing. But yeah, so having an SSD on thing I have a 2011 iMac, which is awesome, except it's got a 5400 RPM old school drive. It's like
Nice.
it's like dispatching bacteria across the platters to write stuff.
You
it's
get to
really
listen
slow.
to the tick sound too.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
Hear the head crash after all these years. But man, where were we?
Why is Kubernetes good?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Why do it? Why?
Yeah.
Why endure the
Kubernetes?
pain? Yeah.
Oh, this is
why
good, yeah.
Kubernetes?
Yeah.
So when I first started looking into container orchestration, I wanted to do Docker Swarm. Basically, because I didn't want to have to go learn Kubernetes, and I'd already
It was
learned how to use
approachable.
Docker.
I think we
It
all
was
would.
more
I wanted to
approachable,
use Docker
right?
Swarm in the same way that when I started a company, I wanted to sell to small businesses. It just
Right.
seemed a whole lot fucking easier.
Right, right. And it is easier at first.
It
but
just
doesn't
doesn't
give
pay
you
off
as
very much, does it? Yeah.
Right. I mean, and
Lesson
so
learned.
why is Kubernetes bigger? Well, for one thing, why is Kubernetes better? For one thing, it's a lot bigger. It's the it's the biggest open source project there is, at least as of a few months ago. I assume it still
really?
is. There's huge huge community, huge support, huge sort of ancillary projects that are already being built up to solve common problems in Kubernetes. One of which is Prometheus, the monitoring database. It's a pull-based database instead of push.
The dashboard, I think, is actually like an open source.
Right.
Separate
So
thing.
there's all these
Yeah.
open source tools
Yeah.
clustered around Kubernetes.
Is
and
Kubernetes
there's ways of doing.
is it governed by the Cloud Native Foundation? Is that the
Yeah.
group? And so
Yeah.
do you,
And their only other project is Prometheus,
Right.
the database for monitoring.
well, and then a bunch of, if you go to the Cloud Native Foundation, they actually have a lot of stuff that I don't know how it works. They endorse it. I don't know if they produce it entirely, but they're becoming a force because I saw that and I looked at it and I wondered.
they own Kubernetes,
Right.
and Prometheus,
Right.
So-
I look at them and I wonder, hey, is this the next Apache? Right? Is this
Right.
where that goes?
right.
Or
So-
maybe at a higher level, do we see some major collision between are
Well-
those two galaxies that merge at some point?
And the other thing about Kubernetes is it's actually been around for quite a while now. It's been around since before Docker. Well, maybe not before Docker, but before Docker mattered.
Right.
'Cause
Google was using
and
Kubernetes.
they called it Borg.
They called
back
it
then.
Borg,
Yep.
and they were using this system with Linux containers,
LXC
right?
containers?
Which is apparently a lot more complicated. I haven't looked into how you
Well,
do it.
so
but
that goes way back.
Yeah,
I mean, they go
that's
back to
like
like 2009
the
or
old-
something like
old
that.
tech.
And they were around forever, and no one could. I mean, like in the same way that remember trying to wrap your head around containerization. Period.
Right.
People looked at it and said, "What the fuck is this?
What is that?"
How am I supposed to use it?"
It was so hard. I
Yeah.
did it one time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't fun.
Well, even just
and
trying
I
to
didn't even really
explain-
know what I did.
Explain what Docker is to. Don't even try to explain it to someone who doesn't do software development, but try to explain it to someone who does software development who's never used Docker.
Right.
Like even if you already know how
Hard enough.
computers work, explaining what a Docker image is.
Yeah.
What a container is. I tell people Docker images are crystallized RAM. That's the easiest way I can think of. To
good
put
way
it.
to think of it.
Well
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you load all your shit into memory, install everything that you need, and when you're happy with it all, you take a snapshot of it, and that's your Docker image. In order to run that image, you have to have the framework, right? And the
But that
framework knows how to talk to the OS,
Yeah.
and only ask it for the things it actually needs,
Yep.
right? And inside that container,
there's not a
there's
huge-
nothing extra. There's
not like
nothing in there that you don't need.
It's not like a virtual machine where there's this huge
Right.
like adapter layer that like the virtual machine, the OS in the virtual machine says like, give me a sound card, and then the virtualization layer is like, here's a sound card that you know how to talk to. Just
Yeah.
kidding, I'm pretending and I'm translating it all in software.
Right.
Whereas the Docker containers are like, give me a sound card, and it's just working with the operating system at its native layer. It cuts
Yeah.
out that middle layer.
And so when you build an image and it's pulling all those layers, right? It's able to do a diff against what you already have and be able to see, what it needs to pull down. And that was one of the hardest things for me to grasp. But like once I got
The file
idea
system layers.
that it's doing layers,
Yeah.
it made it a lot more approachable. Because like how do I handle, like I need to write a file maybe inside this container, which is try not to.
Right.
It's
that's the
ephemeral,
case.
right? You need to find. You need
It
to
might
find
not be
ways
there
to
when
do
you
it.
look for it the
Yeah,
next time.
exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to put a disclaimer on. I have no fucking idea if a Docker container can actually talk to a sound card because that's not what they're used for. It's not the kind of hardware
You
they interface
can-
with, but I assume so.
You can. I haven't done it yet, but I've been looking into it. You can do let's say there's headless. You can do a head full container, like you could VirtualBox.
So you can
or whatever.
attach a display to it, essentially, or a virtualized display.
Yeah.
So I assume so. I mean, at a fundamental level,
I mean, it
can
should
talk.
work. I've never had to try to do that,
No,
right?
yeah.
I'm
I
building
haven't
web
either.
apps. They don't need sound.
Locally
or
enough,
UI,
yeah.
right?
Through magic and the residual effects of Red Bull and pizza, Docker can talk directly to the hardware without a virtualization layer. That is far beyond my true understanding of it. But even that is hard enough to get the idea across. And
So to explain what Docker is to someone, you basically have to explain to them what virtualization is first,
Right.
Which isn't that hard, right? And then you sort of explain that, well, Docker gives you all the parts you need without all the parts you don't. Right?
Yeah, even so though, without the context, without the pain. I think there's pain involved
and
here.
that's-
Without the pain of spinning up like Vagrant boxes and watching.
Yep.
Well, I guess we haven't solved the hard drive portion of the pain, but
That's
like
right.
without seeing that and seeing what it takes, and like you actually install the operating system, and it actually takes more time than if you installed it directly on the hardware,
Yeah.
because you only get about 80% of the hardware's performance.
And I mean, and potentially it does take up more space, because if you were running multiple Ubuntu Vagrant, boxes, then that's a virtual machine times whatever running on your machine, and
Yeah.
so Docker can use some of those layers, and
I just
Much
feel,
more efficiently.
Yeah, and I just feel like without context, without having gone through and done it, it's very easy to take for granted. Like, oh, okay, cool, another layer on top of virtualization.
And
Got
so, and it's also all this extra complexity. Why should I go learn that if I haven't felt the pain? I'm not motivated to go learn that. And the same is true of Kubernetes and orchestration.
So I talked about Kubernetes and Swarm. And Swarm, I turned on Swarm. Alan, you and I did. And we had that dashboard in front of us, and we watched containers moving between the hoods, because the containers were crashing, by the way. But that's why they were bouncing
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah.
But they were coming back up.
They
And,
were.
like it was like OOMing almost instantaneously, but the service never went down.
Right.
Right. We were still able to hit the app, but it was bouncing all over the
Yeah.
place. But then it was like, aha, light bulb moment. Same thing
Yeah.
I had with Docker was on the project that you're on. Same one we've been talking about.
Yeah.
The first time we set up Docker containers, images that ran it, and we built 2 images on the machine, and then we turned one off.
Yeah.
And we built a new image of a new deploy. We had the app running, and we turned the other one on, and the app had been deployed from a local perspective. It had been deployed, and it took about 1.5 seconds.
Yeah.
And prior to that, Terraform, stand up a box, give me, or just like even with a box that was already, we didn't do any Terraform. The Ansible scripts took 25 minutes to actually deploy a new version.
That's right.
And it was like, apps off, apps on, new version, and it was like a light bulb hit, and I was like, I still don't understand how it does it necessarily, but I understand
The need
that
for
is
it,
valuable.
the value.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
don't
of course-
understand how electrons work exactly, but I know a light's good.
Yeah.
Electricity's handy.
Yeah. It really helps my voice get to the YouTubes.
And so, that's the value of Kubernetes, is that it solves so much of those so many of the pain points that we've had up to this point. And if you go read a DevOps book about Kubernetes, that's that I very much recommend Victor Forsick's books. I've learned probably most of what I know about this stuff from, or at least that was my starting point. And he talks about that, right? He's been in software for a long time. He talks about writing, BASIC before it got the visual prefix, and ASP before it got the .NET suffix, and other things, right? Just been around a long time, right? Seeing all of the pain points, and you see how the previous generation of technology ends up failing people and what they have to do to work around those failures.
Right.
And then you see that the newer generation solves those almost always by adding more complexity, right? I mean, you are going to have to go learn stuff. That's part of it.
We talked,
but everyone is learning this. Kubernetes is everywhere.
You have to do it.
You have to do it.
You have to do it.
And it gives you, as an organization, one of the advantages of Kubernetes is developer portability, right? I mean, if someone's built something that works in Kubernetes, another engineer, while they might not have built it the same way, should be able to pretty easily read it and see what it's doing, right?
I feel pretty confident, and this is, I think, a bold statement, but I feel pretty confident that if you're a manager in an organization and you're not using Kubernetes, you have to do it.
Yeah.
If you're a developer in the field and you don't know how it works, or if you're full stack, I mean, maybe some orgs you get the benefit of not having ops, but like DevOps is great. learn how to do your own ops. I think that'll be a huge benefit for you. But if you're in a DevOps environment and you as a developer don't understand Kubernetes, you also have to do it. I mean, this is a thing that
It's not going away,
and it's gonna drop you and leave you in its dust if it doesn't.
I would say that's where it's the DevOps equivalent of JavaScript.
Right.
What? I know, because it's everywhere now, and it's going to continue. And
it's going to eat the world.
It's going to eat the world, and more things are going to be built on it.
It's actually solving problems, though.
Oh yeah,
it's way better designed than JavaScript.
right. I just mean in its necessity.
Yeah,
like
that. That's right. You can't.
You don't have a choice.
Like
everybody has to know some JavaScript.
That's right.
Whether you want to learn a framework or just like soldier on in vanilla,
there is one
vanilla
client-side
JS.
computing programming language. There's only one.
It's the
and
one.
That's JavaScript, and you got to use it.
And Kubernetes fundamentally stands to be the one DevOps system.
It's getting bigger and bigger. And so when I first started looking at this stuff, it wasn't completely clear that Kubernetes was going to eclipse Docker Swarm. Now it's completely clear that it has.
Yeah.
For sure.
There's no
Pretty
comparison.
absolute.
Yeah, they don't even try.
And to be fair,
Docker Swarm would have been like the Elm of JavaScript.
Does Kubernetes become a JavaScript in as much as it is the one and only one? Probably not.
Yeah.
But it is the one now.
I would say it is.
Yeah,
it is.
I would say it will be.
I mean,
yeah.
and it's
because you see
complex. I have a hard time seeing anyone build another container orchestration platform. I think people might extend Kubernetes and change it in various ways.
Well, that's a possibility.
Is there going to ever be a Kubernetes competitor? Well, maybe eventually if it stands still long enough. But
the point I'm trying to make, though, is even if that were the case, even if there were the possibility of a different Kubernetes, learning orchestration, that's a must.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is certain. If you're not learning that, and you're not developing that skill set, and you're not developing that practice within your organization, you are getting left behind.
And the syntax is
faster than you realize.
The syntax is not the hard part of learning Kubernetes.
No, it's actually really
YAML. It's straightforward. It's easy to read.
Super easy to learn how to use it.
Learning the concepts is kind of hard.
It's the mental gymnastics of what the fuck is it exactly is it
way
doing?
Of doing things. So
and how do I write my app to leverage it is important.
Part of what you have to understand is basic clustering, right? What is a cluster? My understanding of that came from my work with Elasticsearch, right? I mean, I have some idea of how you take nodes,
masters versus
and then
nodes,
you put
and all
data
that good
on
stuff,
those nodes, and you distribute that data among the nodes in a replicated, consistent, available kind of way. Well, Kubernetes is doing all those things too. It's doing it with your computation. It's doing it with your web app.
Yeah, it's doing it with
not just storing
Docker
data.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not just data.
It's not just JSON, right? Yeah.
And so there's that whole network, cluster layer of computation that's happening. But then it's what Kubernetes is doing with that cluster that's new and different, right? It's not just shuffling data around. It's not just replicating things, though it is doing all those things. It's making this work in real time. It's doing the networking that makes, you as an end user, you go hit a website, you have no idea what it took to serve your request. But behind the scenes, Kubernetes has routed that to any number of maybe thousands of instances of your application running at the same time. Right? There's really not an upper limit theoretically at least. And so you can have vast complexity, many different things all running at the same time in huge replication. And if you tried to manage things, if you tried to manage the DevOps of applications at that scale without container orchestration, you'd never be able to get it done. Docker, using containerization and orchestration, opens up scales of application deployment that just weren't available before, for one thing. Now, if your app whatever you're doing with it doesn't need all that scale, then that doesn't really gain you that much, but it gains you other things.
Portability, right?
Portability is one thing. Another is it makes it very, very easy to set up self-healing applications so that if something falls over for a known reason, it doesn't make your stack, it doesn't destroy your website, right? Everything can still work as long as you set all that stuff up right. It also meshes very, very nicely with continuous integration. The triumvirate of microservices, containerization, and continuous integration are where you get the real power from all of this stuff. It's when you use Docker and Kubernetes and Circle CI or, God forbid, Jenkins or whatever it is that you have to use.
If you spin up Windows 95 to run your Kubernetes clusters on
right.
Jenkins, but or don't forget about Travis and GitLab. Right. Let's be fair. But yeah,
so it's those things together, right? It's those three things together that give you the great power. If you only have containerization and you only have continuous integration, well, you still have to deploy your app somehow. If you have the other two...
Let's point out, though, that continuous integration as we know it would not exist without containerization. Right. Containerization is what made that what it is. And so if you don't use Docker, if you're not in containerization, but you've used maybe Circle CI, that's the magic, right? Of
you're using
how
Docker.
you're
already using it.
Yeah, you're writing Docker compose files. It's just a Circle CI file.
They're containerizing whatever you're telling them to do.
Hey, I have to pause for a minute and say I'm sorry to everyone in the live stream that we've just neglected. Well, Ty's been in there.
No, yeah.
Thank you, Ty. Okay, you guys are on it.
Excellent.
Dude,
There's been a bunch of chatter, but we guys
got your back.
Thank you.
We're over here.
I see we're getting some compliments on the camera work. It's not me; it's the machines.
It is.
Well, that
It
robot's
is
doing a
Jimmy.
good
It
job.
is Jimmy the camera guy.
That's right, Jimmy the camera guy. Everyone, he's trapped inside a convolutional neural network. Well, you know,
And he looks like an owl now.
he's an owl. He's a real owl-looking guy.
Yeah.
Hint, hint. Maybe we'll get a sponsor out of it. I don't know.
I'll be honest.
Hey, you know,
I
it's that
saw
ti-
that
it's
logo
that time
and I
of the
thought,
episode.
We should probably talk to somebody.
We should
about
probably at
getting
least
some of that
address it
monies.
because I just realized that the logo
Yeah, it's
for the
there.
camera is in there. So I mentioned we got this new thing, but it's called an Owl Labs.
It is really cool. Yeah.
It's super sweet. They don't sponsor us yet, but it's that time in the show where I start getting desperate and begging for money.
But check this out. So if I start talking, come on, Al, here I am. Look at me. That's all I did.
I've seen it do. I've seen it do at least a three angle split, and also across the top. If you don't know the layout of our conference room, it may not be evident, but that's a 360-degree panorama. So, Alan, you and I are directly across from each other. So when I point there, I'm pointing directly at Alan in front of the thing. But it's pretty sweet.
It is.
Pretty
That
cool.
is pretty cool.
I didn't realize until the stream that the panorama up top is also up top for like everybody's
Oh
streaming.
yeah, everyone else is seeing
Yeah.
that too. It's all composite. And so like this thing is all on device. As far as my computer's concerned, it's getting a 1080p webcam feed, and what it's seeing is all these boxes moving around. So that's all happening on the machine itself, and it does have eyes that.
It
look
is
at
called
you.
the owl.
It is
and
called
it
the
looks
owl.
like an owl.
Owl
Yeah, and it
Labs.
lights up. How do we put the owl on the owl? Can we do that?
Like actually see it on the camera? No, because the camera image originated.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
If I had a second webcam, I could point it at it.
Screen share the website.
That's a good idea.
That's how we get that monies.
You know, this is. Thanks everyone. I think it's owllabs.com. Yeah, this guy, Owl Labs. Pretty sweet. A lot of people have asked about it. We did some client meetings. We had like a 5-hour webcam. That's what he looks like right there.
Yeah.
Hello, little owl.
There he is.
He sure does too.
This thing, again,
The eyes
we wouldn't
light
mind
up
a sponsorship.
terrifyingly.
We don't have one. This is legit. We dig it.
I really like the equipment.
Yeah. And so we have this thing. It's pretty cool for streaming, but it works really well in a meeting. We share the whiteboard on it and all kinds of stuff. I'm really good purchase. Good use of AI too.
Hell yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right.
That's pretty sweet. And they're not cheap. It actually needs some computing power on that thing, I assume.
It does to swap all the views around like that.
This is not a Raspberry Pi with a Logitech cam plugged into it, and it is priced thusly.
Right.
So be prepared for that. But it's pretty sweet. Well, I don't know. Does anybody have any closing thoughts on Kubernetes CI DevOps? Did you ever get your build to pass, Sloan?
Not yet.
Good.
We're
supposed to be
still
abandoning
fighting
it, yeah.
We're still fighting the entropy here. I've learned a lot in the process. I've found lots of new tools, new ways of doing things. I mean, the real advantage of Kubernetes is the community. I mean, there's just so many people out there using it, working in this realm and building new tools on top of it, that the thing that I'm struck by is while I'm writing some, custom DevOps code for the new Kubernetes setup, most of the heavy lifting is done by the framework. Whereas, the older setup, basically the entire code base for our conventional deployment system was custom. We used Terraform and we used Ansible and then we used Packer, but we still had to write all of that. We still had to define our process. Whereas in Kubernetes, we're using a process that's already established. We just have to adapt our stuff to work in that process, right? And then once we've done that, the process is always the same. It's Kubernetes. That's just how it works. This is how you use it. There's a few different ways you can access it. There's different ways you can organize your code. But at the end of the day, you're still taking Kubernetes specs and you're applying them with kubectl
to some stack somewhere. And that's something we didn't talk about in this project is like the on-prem installs that we have.
Right.
Where we ran Docker Compose for people running on-prem hardware that's running a full replica of this environment, but in an air-gapped, no internet access network.
And so that's using the same Docker images that we would use in Kubernetes, but it's not using Kubernetes.
And the huge limitation there is like that works. However, like we need them to supply all the hardware in one box. Right. So the ability to cluster that and actually roll it out within these air-gapped networks was like, how are we going to solve that problem? Kubernetes is the resounding answer to it. Yeah. Was there a solution before Kubernetes? Absolutely, but this is the right one, given that it's an option.
It's and one cool thing that I know, while we were working on the eDiscovery app, like it was cool to be able to make changes in flight. Oh, I need two more web apps, and here those boxes come up. Or,
scaling it was rad.
Yeah, that part's really cool too. And the bulletproof part's really great as well.
We found out on that particular app how shitty one of our microservices was.
Yeah. So that guy...
The app was running and just fine. We just found that it was OOMing and crashing like every fucking 15 minutes.
So guys, what it was all right. So we were using Tika by the Apache.
It wasn't originally. It's an Apache whatever they call it, incubator project.
Yeah.
It's an open source.
What's Tika?
So Tika, you throw text at it. You throw like Word documents. You throw PDFs at it. And
at a fundamental level, if you've ever used OpenOffice or LibreOffice, it is that engine for Office documents with a web app wrapped around it that lets you generate PDFs.
Well, we were using a LibreOffice binary to convert something better.
So Tika is that, right?
But what the problem was, the one we were using, it had a Node.js server in front of it that was just blowing up Tika in the background. So it was calling Tika because you can also use Tika as a command line tool. So you can just go Tika parse my my PDF or whatever. And so that's essentially what the server's doing. We were passing bytes to it and going, here, parse this PDF or whatever. And Node was blowing it up. And
so the thing is, like, we turned it loose and we let the async happen, and it was just like, our app was firing thousands of requests at it and just nuking that container.
So you DDoSed your ticket.
Yeah. We DDoSed our own shit. But when the job failed, RabbitMQ never got an acknowledgement, so it put the job back on the queue. And Kubernetes is like, "Hey, this thing's out of memory. I'm gonna kill it and put another one." And the fucking job's finished and everything got done. We just looked at the log.
It was
just
like
inefficient.
Yeah,
wow. Yeah, we were just blowing it up.
Chain DDoSed.
So here you go, Blake.
But the service never went down.
I think I ended up just putting like sleep for a second in between each one. Just slow your roll, Node.
Excellent.
Just slow your roll.
This app is not currently in production.
No.
Just so anyone knows. Don't do that in production.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed by how many sleeps there are in my Kubernetes DevOps setup. They're all over the place.
That's a good high point to end on. Man, it was fun having Sloan on the show.
I'll be back.
You got to come back, and we'll talk more about this. I'm shocked because I told you guys we couldn't get you on the show without actually getting pulled past the event horizon into the singularity.
Yeah.
And we did it. We fucking did it.
It's happening tomorrow.
Mission accomplished. Mission accomplished.
We did it. So we'll get you the next time, and maybe that's the topic. We go deep on that.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
That's fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Well, cool. This was fun. Thanks for everyone that tuned in on the podcast, everyone who tuned in on the live stream as well. We're going to start maybe not every episode, but we'll live stream more of these, right?
The one thing we didn't do was hate Facebook.
Oh wow! Oh no!
Oh, you had an article.
I just got
didn't
called out
you?
on it.
Yeah.
In the live chat. That
Oh,
we did
no.
not bash Facebook.
I love that. That's your
You
character
gotta support
arc.
the fans.
Yeah.
I know.
People.
They want my stick.
Yeah. Your character has developed to the point that it's let's hear your token
Let's do
Facebook.
it.
What's
Well,
you got? What you
I was
got?
trying to think. Where did we end up about Facebook?
What's the
at
last
some
thing
point this
that
week
you said
we talked
about Facebook? I don't know. I remember
Oh,
you
no.
saying there was an article, and you were like, "I got
Yeah.
ammo. Here we go."
Yeah, you
No,
said-
well, that was.
yeah.
I think it was actually several weeks ago at this point. Sadly, because Facebook just keeps coming out with more stuff about what they're doing.
Yeah.
But
They just keep abusing your privacy without abandon.
Are we getting into politics here? Because I'm feeling some politics.
no, but we had talked about because we were talking about how we've been listening to a Spotify playlist for the last 2 days, and it seems like the more we talk about different things, the more it seems to show up in the Spotify radio station.
Jesse looked up the word for this. It's some German dude's name effect.
Does anyone remember?
I don't know.
Or it's retargeted advertising that we haven't been told about yet.
Exactly
Right.
right. That's what we said.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it ends up back with Facebook, and
Yeah.
they're building the shadow profiles,
That's what you get.
shadow
for-
government.
Oh, yeah.
deep
You
state, all
you
that.
allowed the microphone access, internet. This is what you did.
Yeah.
Well, and
Hey, surveillance
I do-
device.
I do
Play my
become-
favorite song.
Says the guys around a group of microphones talking to the internet.
with an owl literally looking
and then
at
the
me.
owl.
Like, don't mind me.
And we
I'm
don't
just
know,
here to
we
put
don't
your
know
face
what's gonna,
everywhere.
He's on our Wi-Fi network. They told me I needed to do it in order to configure it. I don't know.
Did you sign up with that with Facebook?
I didn't
Oh
re-
God, we're dead.
I didn't read the terms and
Oh,
conditions.
they had perfect models of all of us already. It's not like it's new.
It's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Hello, neural network. This is what my face looks like, but you already knew that.
It's just like face, beer, computer. Like that's all that's in this room.
It's just a bunch of bounding boxes in its little spreadsheet in here. All right, well, that's a show. You meet your contractual obligations to shit on Facebook privacy.
They suck.
We can we can call it an episode. We'll see you guys in a week. In a week, we're gonna try and do a remote. We'll see what
First
happens.
remote.
I'm gonna be
First remote.
First
I'm gonna
remote.
be in the
It's
Caribbean.
significant. It'll be a good deal.
And I think we're going to talk about. I talked to him today. I said we want to talk about DNS and like all the infrastructure behind it. He works for a domain registrar. He's a Python dev down there.
that's cool.
So we can talk a lot about Python stuff, but specifically DNS. He's like, he's been working for him for like 5 years. He's like, I don't know that much about DNS. I was like, motherfucker, you know a lot more than we do from the outside. He's like, I guess I know more than when I started. And I was like,
DNS
perfect.
is a black box that I consume
I'm
sometimes.
interested.
I don't know
I'm-
anything about what it
It's
does.
black magic to me.
Two levels. I'm interested on the infrastructure and the technology. I'm also interested in the business itself. Is pretty fascinating of all that stuff. They're both a DNS. They're a domain registrar as well as a registry, which are two different things. We'll get into it next week. But the next time you hear from me, I'll be on a beach. Sucks to be you guys.
Excellent.
It's going to be 18 degrees when I get on an airplane. It's going to be 85 when I get off. And you bet your ass I'm going to be rubbing
Are
that
you,
in
are
on
you
Slack.
going to see
There's, like,
Tosh?
photos. I'm going to see Tosh. Yeah.
Excellent.
So we'll be down there for a week, but we'll keep the show rolling and we'll
Hell
figure
yeah.
out a remote setup over there.
Oh, that sounds great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a week.
Yeah, man.
Wave at the owl, everybody. Hi,
That's,
Facebook.
that's it for the recording. The recorder's off. The live stream's still up. We do need to throw down
Some intros.
Some intros.
Got to record some intros.
For those of you watching, the intros are not actually recorded before the show most of the
Oh
time.
man,
We put those together. after
everyone's
the fact.
seeing how the sausage is made now.
Yeah.
This is you guys aren't paying $1 per episode for our Patreon, but that's literally the only thing we have is you get to watch us record intros. And it's usually about 6 minutes of just complete horse shit.
Yeah.
I should
What
go.
do you wanna say?
Something like
I laughed until I cried when I edited today's episode last night.
yeah, that was good stuff.
I cut out about 5 minutes of it's the build up to it that I don't think other people will find it as funny as I found it.
Sure.
But if you had listened to the rest of it, every time I woke up at like 4 o'clock in the morning laughing and tearing up in bed. And Paige was like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I was like, "That was really funny, Alan. And the Carnegie Foundation."
I watched a lot of PBS growing up. Yeah. Let's see.
Something.
I honestly love Dave Brubeck because of PBS. Because Take 5 is like the permanent like bed music. Like he's like, what are we gonna play? I don't know. Play Take 5, and they put Take 5 under like all the funding credits. And I was just like, Dave Brubeck's awesome, and it's because of that.
All right.
Thanks, Dave.
You ready?
I'm recording now for
Okay.
the outros or intros or whatever. You got one? Sorry.
That was nice.
Wait. Friday afternoon deploy was configured using a Kubernetes spec.
Okay. I like it.
That's the type of shit we do, Sloan.
This is
I
what
know.
we, yeah.
Okay.
No,
This is
it's
it.
not supposed to make sense.
That might not be the one. It might
No,
be the
yeah.
one. We're warming up here.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, just throw them out.
What's the goal here?
Friday afternoon deploy
And then a thing.
is it started the very first one was Friday afternoon deploy is recorded at the offices of Lofty Labs in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And now it is maybe relevant to the content, maybe not, but it's Friday afternoon deploy was filmed by a live studio audience. Whatever comes to mind.
You know what's going to happen? I'm going to think of one of these at like 11:15 tonight.
Let's
And
just hold on
Write
to
it down.
Just
Write
hold
it
on
down
to
for
it.
next time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Friday afternoon deploy is stumping me. Coming up with something clever.
That's what happens when the lights turn on and
know,
the
man.
owl's
I
looking
get-
at you.
Yeah, the
And
owl.
There's
the
there's
death
five there's
stare.
5 people watching us
much
live on
pressure.
YouTube.
This is our first time doing this with an audience.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
no.
good.
It doesn't feel as fun with people watching.
Creativity is hard.
Totally. It's like naming things.
Naming
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. It's like Friday afternoon deploy is a random string of hexadecimal numbers.
That's pretty good.
That's
That is pretty good.
Friday,
I like that one.
Friday afternoon deploy is a UUID 4.
no nice. I can cut myself talking over the end of that. I promise. I fucked that up.
No,
Except
it's
I guess
fine.
it's
That
got to
wouldn't-
be
yeah.
true in some way, right? Or does it?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
Although what happened last time
Define
is
truth.
Alex
Right.
started it last time. Alex said like Friday afternoon deploy is not brought to you by your local NPR station or something like
Yeah,
that.
so
and that's
then
it.
it was
We started,
on,
and
yeah.
I was like, that's a fact. That's true. We could say that. And then it just started happening. Yeah.
Does not have corporate sponsorship. Now
Yes.
I'm just copying.
Also
But,
true. But no. We went into that as well. Funding is not provided by anyone. We had one. I didn't use it. I recorded one once. It's somewhere. It might be it's on this device somewhere, but it was Friday afternoon deploy is brought to you by no one. Please send money and snacks.
Would it be insider dealing if I signed up for your Patreon?
We don't have
We
one.
don't actually have a
there's
Patreon.
No. That's
We
have
have a
a-
Patreon. Come on.
we have a straw man Patreon that we
We have
use to scare-
an Etsy. We have an Etsy store instead.
So there's merchandise. All right, I'm
Yeah,
done.
yeah. Alan hand whittles. Alan whittles Unicode characters.
Oh, we gotta get.
Yeah, we got to. This is the space. This is the space.
No, what you should do is get Cody to print them out.
On his 3D printer.
Yeah, get Cody to print us out some really weird Unicode characters
I'm
to
into
put
that.
on our desk.
That's
a good
badass.
idea.
That's a good idea.
We get the logo etched in the back of it, embossed or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I got one.
All right, let's do it.
Almost there.
You thought too hard.
80%.
Yeah.
Wile E. Coyote. Don't look at the cliff.
Buffering.
Just go across it.
Buffering.
So
Go
this is
across the
Tyrell
cliff.
marketing features before they've been built.
Yeah.
You're on your own. I have 2
Friday-
pints
Friday-
of beer in my bladder.
No,
You made it a long time, sir.
yeah. Well done. Bye. So I'm so close. Oh God, I'm like 95
Almost.
now. 95.
Don't let the pressure get to you.
It's there. I feel it so bad.
See, this is why I could never be a designer.
Yeah,
The
no,
creativity doesn't come to me when I ask for it. That's not how that works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I've got it now.
All right. Here he
Friday
goes.
afternoon deploy hasn't had.
Sorry.
Take two.
Yeah. Friday afternoon deploy hasn't figured out how to use Patreon, so please support us on Etsy by buying a crocheted Kubernetes logo from Alan.
I can actually crochet too, which is what's funny.
I knew it.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
And scene. We did it.
Yeah. If you can build it in a format, I probably have like a base understanding of it at least.
I didn't pick you for like a knit guy or a
Yeah.
tatting guy, but
No.
I thought
Crochet's more
he can
efficient.
crochet.
Yeah.
If you can crochet the Kubernetes logo, I'm pretty impressed. I think you should do that. I think we need one of those in this office.
I could probably do it with enough time. Yeah.
It's not that complicated, right?
we got it. We got a winner. I feel pretty good about it. You can
Honestly,
give it a listen.
I could probably find a template even for the wheel because it's like
Yeah.
a sailor's
Oh, yeah.
wheel.
Yeah.
I believe you that we have a winner.
We got one.
We'll call it.
Okay.
Thank you, recording device, for your service.
Thank you, live people.
Thank you, live streamers, for
Heck yeah.
your service. and
I
watching.
just wave at the TV.
Hey, wave at the
No,
owl.
wave at the
yeah.
owl.
Hey.
Yo!
Thanks, guys.
Peace out.
Yeah, we'll see you not in a week necessarily, unless one of you guys wants to run the live stream while I'm gone. I'm down for it. We'll figure it out. I'll get you set up, but we might not live stream every recording, but we'll do more. So we haven't done it since episode 6, so we'll do it more often than that. See you guys. Thanks.